The 1976 Doctor Who serial, The Masque of Mandragora, is the first story in season 14 and the first Doctor Who story I ever saw. How well does it work in 2020? Let's find out. Hello there, you mysterious energy force, and welcome to Jason Arnopp's terrifying House of Obsession. I am, you won't be too surprised to hear, Jason Arnopp, the author of The Last Days of Jack Sparks, new novel Ghoster, which is currently just 99p on Kindle, and Doctor Who stuff of both the fictional and non-fictional varieties. So I'm going to tell you how I feel about The Masque of Mandragora in 2020, and then I'm going to talk about the special features that are on The Masque of Mandragora disc in this box set. No, in that box set. So I was very excited to go back and revisit The Masque of Mandragora for the first time since 1976. I mean, obviously I wasn't born yet in 1976, you understand, but I kind of sensed it. I must have, I was like minus 20 years old. It's quite weird that I never went back to the story sooner than I have. I think maybe I remembered it as quite a dry kind of historical story, which it is kind of semi-historical. It's a historical sci-fi mashup type of Doctor Who story, a bit like The Visitation. But the central image for me of The Masque of Mandragora has always been Hieronymus and that amazing mask. That mask is so awesome and so scary and so intrinsically Doctor Who for me. I might have seen it on screen for the first time, I can't remember, but I might also equally have seen it for the first time in a Weetabix card that came free with a packet of Weetabix in the 70s. I actually loved The Masque of Mandragora on this sitting, and I think it's great, and that's quite remarkable, especially when I don't tend to like historical stories all that much, kind of with a period setting. I mean, I do like The Visitation, and there are several other examples of historical Doctor Who stories that I do like, and it's nice to add The Masque of Mandragora to that list. So let's talk about some of the things I loved about this. The cast are really good. Yeah, the supporting cast are really good. I mean, obviously Tom Baker and Elizabeth Sladen are both great in their roles as the Doctor, as if I need to say that, and Sarah Jane Smith. But the supporting cast take it really seriously. It's almost, I think maybe if there is a criticism of The Masque of Mandragora, it does kind of feel as if the Italian 15th century Machiavellian plot is kind of existing in a different world to the sci-fi evil Mandragora Force plot, but it does all come together at the end. But anyway, it's like the supporting cast are really in a Shakespearean play or something. They really are giving it their all. They're really good. Yeah, the guy playing Giuliano and the guy playing Count Federico, they both really go for it. Oh, and the guy who plays Hieronymus is fantastic. He has such a brilliant face. What a scary face he's got in itself, but it's almost a shame he spends so much of his time covered up with the Hieronymus mask. But then again, the Hieronymus mask is just so awesome that, it's not that much of a shame. There are sword fights and swashbuckling and stuff like that. It's great to see Tom Baker do some hand-to-hand combat in the style of Jon Pertwee. That's quite an unusual thing for the Fourth Doctor to be doing, and he certainly didn't do much more of that as Doctor Who, or his era of Doctor Who, went on. I'm not so keen on the use of horses in this story. They look a bit genuinely scared at one point when the Doctor waves his rattle around. I never liked that sort of thing, but that's probably the only thing I don't like about this story, I'd say. The story has a really unusual premise and structure, doesn't it? In that right at the start, the Doctor and Sarah Jane Smith look out of their TARDIS scanner to see what's nearby, and they see the Mandragora helix, and the Doctor immediately knows what it is, which is really interesting. Usually we slowly reveal across 4 episodes the nature of the evil or the enemy, and so it's really unusual for the Doctor to go, oh yes, that's the Mandragora helix, isn't it? They get separated from the helix, and the helix comes to Earth, kind of follows the TARDIS, so the Doctor is kind of responsible for quite a lot of death in this story. By the way, I will be talking about this serial in its entirety during this video, so if you haven't seen it yet, you might want to save this video until you have, because spoilers. So it's quite weird that the Doctor knows what the threat is from the start, but then kind of doesn't actually realise for a while, I think, that the helix has followed him and the TARDIS and Sarah Jane to 15th century Italy, of all places. One thing I absolutely love about the Hinchcliffe era, as Matthew Sweet brings up in the interview that he does with Philip Hinchcliffe on this box set, which is really good. It lasts about 77 minutes and it's pretty thorough. But yes, the willingness to include sheer unbridled evil. And I love that the Mandragora helix is this force of energy that is basically pure malevolence floating around the world, causing destruction and mayhem and all sorts of inconvenience. There are also 2 cliffhangers that I really like, and I'm not entirely sure if I saw all of the episodes, but I kind of feel that I did, because I can remember the red helix going through the woods, and that seeming quite ominous and quite scary. But the cliffhanger for part 2, I definitely remember, and that would have scared the hell out of me. And it's still pretty scary now for some reason. All it is really is the cult leader wearing one of the sort of the secondary masks, saying, "Demnos shall not be denied his pleasure, little one." But there's something sort of quintessentially Doctor Who-like about just the whole setup of that cliffhanger, and the voice, the creepy voice, a little bit Sutekh-like actually, although it's not Gabriel Wolf. The villains were all very posh, weren't they? Back in those days. Well, all of Doctor Who was very posh, let's be honest. So that cliffhanger where Sarah Jane gets recaptured by the cult, and by the way, the cult are just fantastic, aren't they? I don't mean the popular rock band with Ian Astbury there. I mean Hieronymus's cult, the cult of Demnos, and all the cult stuff, the whole ritual thing, and the altar and the knives and the cloaks and the masks. It's just great. That's just pure Doctor Who, isn't it? That's kind of like a touch of ritual and that kind of atmosphere that we won't see again on the show until Stones of Blood. And what a serial that is. I'm looking forward to talking to you about that sometime. But for me, the absolute great cliffhanger that I'd kind of forgotten about, and it kind of feels a little bit like one of the best Doctor Who cliffhangers of all time for me. I mean, it would certainly be in the top, well, I mean, it'd be in the top 50 list, let's say that, because it's so classic Doctor Who. Count Federico storming up the steps to rip off Hieronymus's mask, only to reveal just creepy purple light. And that's just a great image. And then Count Federico, who's the villain of the piece, and we thought would be there till the end really, just gets zapped. And we're not 100% sure of this in the cliffhanger, but he is dead. He is dead, as we see at the start of episode 4. His body is like a load of ash. And by the way, there's some pretty unpleasant ashen corpses in this. It's pretty nasty. As was often the case in the Hinchcliffe times, there's definitely quite a realistic tone, and that is established early on when we see how vicious Count Federico is when he's pillaging and setting fire to villagers and doing all sorts. What an absolute cad. That cliffhanger at the end of episode 3 though is an absolute doozy. Count Federico's horrendous scream kind of puts me in mind of the power of the cliffhanger of Pyramids of Mars episode 1, which is probably, I might say that's my favourite cliffhanger actually, but forget I said that, just in case I ever do a top 10 classic Doctor Who cliffhangers video. It might not end up being that anyway. And then part 4 is great because obviously all the cult have been taken over by the Mandragora energy force, and they're all just a load of empty cloaks walking about, basically possessed by the helix, which is tremendous. That's always a great thing in Doctor Who. People just being wiped out and replaced by evil forces. That's always a pleasure. The confrontation between the Doctor and Hieronymus in the underground cult chamber is really good. I feel like it could have been better, and I think it was limited by special effects actually, because there are these weird close-ups of Hieronymus's face, or his mask rather, when he's zapping the Doctor. It's a bit confusing seeing his whole face suddenly fills the screen, and then we cut between his fingers zapping the Doctor and the full-on mask. I'd imagine the director would have liked to have seen just all of Hieronymus in one shot with the finger pointing out, but I doubt that was possible in those days. Still, the mask itself is a great way to end this episode, and I really love the moment when the Doctor seemingly returns to the mask to be reunited with Sarah Jane, wearing that big, quite scary looking weird mask, and she thinks it's him, but it's not. It's another empty cloak and mask walking around, powered only by some kind of evil life force. And then of course there's a lovely massacre. You can't beat a good old massacre within the world of Doctor Who, obviously. Yeah. And the final thing I loved about the Masque of Mandragora was the Doctor randomly saying, I wouldn't say no to a salami sandwich. I really don't know why he says that. He seems to be demonstrating how he has mimicked Hieronymus's voice for the last couple of minutes, doesn't he? But it's just really weird, and you can tell that Tom was very much riffing. Does anyone know if I wouldn't say no to a salami sandwich was actually in the writer Louis Marx's script? If so, let me know down in comments. And speaking of comments, I really want you to get down in comments and tell me what you think of the Masque of Mandragora. Obviously, in season 14, there's a load of absolute solid gold classics like the Robots of Death and the Talons of Weng-Chiang. But is there a place in your heart for the Masque of Mandragora as there is now in mine? Get down there in comments and tell me. Now let's talk about a few of the special features on the Masque of Mandragora disc, because I've certainly enjoyed those. If you'd like to see a full video, by the way, that goes through each disc in the season 14 box set and shows you each of the special features, then consider joining my Patreon. My patrons support my channel with a monthly pledge, and they are absolute legends who help this channel improve and grow. Anyway, the special features on this disc are pretty good. I would have liked a few more. I would have liked maybe more new stuff, because I think the majority of stuff on this disc was on the DVD of the Masque of Mandragora. But nevertheless, the special features in and as of themselves are pretty good. The main one to discuss is the making of doc that was on the DVD, and that's about, I think, 26 minutes long, and I found that pretty thorough. You got a couple of journalists like Jim Sangster and Steve O'Brien talking, but also a lot of the cast as well. There's quite a few cast members in there. Most of the main supporting cast members are present and correct, and the director, Rodney Bennett's there as well. And so it's really nice to get their memories, and there's some pretty funny memories and, you know, very fond memories of that time they spent in Port Miriam filming the Masque of Mandragora. And then, of course, there's Behind the Sofa, which is great. Of course, Behind the Sofa, the running time of it doesn't last for 4 episodes worth of Doctor Who, because we're not really seeing people. It's not like an audio commentary where we see everyone reacting to every moment of the episodes. So it's just about 26 minutes long, I think, this Behind the Sofa, and it cuts between Tom Baker, Louise Jameson and Philip Hinchcliffe on one sofa, and Peter Purvis and Sophie Aldred on the other sofa. So that's a nice mixture of the people who were there and made the show at the time, and 2 lovely characters from elsewhere on the Doctor Who timeline who haven't actually seen the Masque of Mandragora before. I think maybe Sophie Aldred might have seen it before, but she doesn't look too certain about that, to be honest. So that's really good and really funny, and they go through the whole thing, obviously in 26 minutes, but I don't think you'd really want it to be the full length. It works very well with highlights of their reactions to the whole thing. There's also a Now and Then documentary, which lasts for less than 10 minutes and kind of shows the locations then versus the locations now. Although I think the definition of now, since this Now and Then thing was made for the DVD, was probably, I don't know, 2010. I think the DVD might have come out, because that's when the Making of documentary was made. And then there's some other lovely stuff. There's lots of sort of bits and pieces, including probably the highlight for me in those bits and pieces was just a 1 minute and 41 second clip of Elizabeth Sladen being interviewed on Nationwide with a Dalek in the background, which then exterminates her at the end of the interview because she's announced she's leaving Doctor Who in about a year. So that's a really nice piece. And there's also lovely sort of trails and continuities and a photo gallery and lots of lovely stuff. So I would have liked more stuff, but I always want more special features, especially in a kind of a more kind of in-depth kind of way, and more perhaps a more serious kind of way, as much as I like Behind the Sofa. But actually, having said that, there's infotext subtitles as well on this disc, and I believe that the infotext gets redone for these Blu-rays. I know the infotext was redone for Earthshock, so that's really good. Now, in about 20 seconds, I'm going to show you 4 more Doctor Who videos on this channel, which you might want to carry on watching. Until the next one then, don't forget to embrace your obsession.